I tell new prospects this story the night they earn their patch. Not because it's the biggest thing the Iron Covenant ever did. Because it's the truest. There's a letter I keep in the top drawer of my desk at the clubhouse. I don't need to read it anymore. I have it memorized. But I keep it there because some things deserve to stay close to where decisions get made. Dex Hartley was our road captain for 11 years. Big man, slow smile, the kind of rider who could navigate a mountain pass in the dark by feel alone. He had a way of noticing things the rest of us missed, a cracked bearing before it seized, a brother going quiet before he broke. He was the one who put his hand on your shoulder before you even knew you needed it. He died on a Tuesday morning in late October, 7 years ago. A semi drifted across the center line on Route 9 outside of Millhaven, and Dex never had a chance. We buried him with his colors on. I gave the eulogy. I'm not sure I've entirely finished grieving him. 2 weeks after the funeral, his sister brought a sealed envelope to the clubhouse. Dex had given it to her the spring before, the week he told us he wanted to ride the Eastern Circuit alone, something he hadn't done since he was young, something he said he needed. She said he told her it was for me, and that she'd know when to deliver it. I sat alone in my office and opened it. His handwriting was big and deliberate, the way a man writes when he's taking his time. He told me about a town called Clover Ridge, about 60 miles east of us. He'd passed through it on that solo run, his bike running rough from a cracked manifold gasket he hadn't caught. He'd limped into the only garage in town, a one-bay place called Pruitt's, attached to a cinder block house at the edge of a gravel lot. The man who came out to look at the bike was named Ray Pruitt. Mid-40s, lean, hands like a carpenter's. He diagnosed the problem in 4 minutes. He didn't have the part on hand, so he called a supplier in the next county, had it driven out the same afternoon, and charged Dex exactly what the part cost him. Not $1 more. But that wasn't the thing Dex wrote about. While they waited for the part, Ray's daughter came out of the house. She was maybe 7 years old, Dex said. Small for her age. She had dark braids and her father's serious eyes, and she was carrying a plate with 2 sandwiches on it, a little crooked from walking carefully. She set it on the workbench beside Dex's bike without a word. Then she looked up at Dex, all his leather and his size and his road-worn face, and she said, "You look hungry." Dex wrote that he didn't trust himself to speak for a moment. Ray apologized and said she had a habit of feeding strays. The little girl looked at her father with total serenity and said she was pretty sure that wasn't just a habit, it was a rule. Then she went back inside. Dex finished his sandwich. Ray had the bike sealed up by late afternoon. When Dex reached for his wallet, Ray shook his head and said the labor was free, the part was enough. Dex argued. Ray said he didn't argue with guests. Dex rode on. He never went back. But he never forgot. At the end of the letter, after 3 pages about a man's quiet dignity and a little girl carrying a crooked plate of sandwiches, Dex wrote one paragraph that I have memorized word for word. He wrote, "I don't know what that man's life looks like now. I didn't ask enough questions. But I know he's out there raising that girl alone, and I know he's the kind of man who wouldn't ask for help even if he needed it, because that's the same kind of man I used to be. If something happens to me, go check on them. Not as a favor. As a debt. That little girl fed a stranger when she didn't have to. We owe her the same." I sat with that letter for a long time. Then I drove out to Clover Ridge. It wasn't hard to find Pruitt's. There was only the one garage, just like Dex described, cinder block, one bay, a hand-painted sign that had faded to almost nothing. A newer pickup sat in the lot. A child's bicycle leaned against the house, the kind with streamers on the handlebars, one of them half torn off. I pulled in. Ray Pruitt came out of the bay wiping his hands on a rag. He didn't recognize me, didn't know why a man in Iron Covenant colors was standing in his lot on a Wednesday afternoon. He just nodded and asked if I needed help. I told him I was a friend of Dex Hartley's. His face changed. The way a man's face changes when he hears the name of someone he only knew briefly but never forgot. I told him Dex was gone. He took his head off and held it against his chest, and he stood there in the lot for a moment looking at the sky. Then he said he was sorry. Then he said he was glad Dex had friends who remembered him. I told Ray what Dex had written. All of it. The sandwiches. The manifold gasket. The paragraph at the end. Ray looked at the ground for a long time. When he looked back up, his jaw was tight and his eyes were bright, and I could tell he was working hard to stay level. He said it wasn't anything. He said Dex was a decent man who needed a hand. I told him that wasn't how Dex saw it. I shook his hand and I left. I needed to understand the shape of his life before I came back. What I found out over the next 3 days wasn't good. Ray had been alone for 6 years, his wife had passed when Nora was 3. He'd kept the garage going on sheer stubbornness. He wasn't rich, but he was steady. The problem wasn't money. 18 months ago, a man had moved into the house next door. His name was Dale Cutter, and he'd started out friendly enough. Ray said so himself when I talked to him again, quietly, over coffee at the diner on Main Street. Friendly, then familiar, then something harder to name. The kind of man who tests what he can get away with. He'd taken an interest in Nora in a way that made Ray uneasy, but nothing Ray could point to and say, definitively, this. Just a pressure. A wrong feeling in a room. Ray had started keeping the garage bay door closed. Started parking closer to the house. Started saying no to things and watching how Cutter reacted to being told no. He reacted poorly. I didn't need to hear more. I went back to the clubhouse and I called church. Every officer, every patched member who could make it. I read them the last paragraph of Dex's letter out loud. The room was very quiet when I finished. Our sergeant-at-arms, a man named Vic who has approximately the warmth of a granite countertop, looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at me. He said, "When do we go?" I said, "End of the week." 78 riders left the clubhouse on Saturday morning. Not because I ordered it. I told people what was needed. I said Saturday, and when I walked out to the lot at 8 o'clock there were bikes lined up from the gate to the road. Brothers from our chapter and 2 others. Men who had never met Ray Pruitt. Men who had never heard of Clover Ridge. Men who came because a dead road captain had written a letter, and because a little girl had carried a plate of sandwiches to a tired stranger, and because in this brotherhood those 2 facts are sufficient. We rode into Clover Ridge at 9:30. I want you to understand what that looks like from the ground. 78 motorcycles moving through a small town. The sound reaches you before the riders do. People stepped out onto porches. A woman walking her dog stopped on the sidewalk and just watched. The diner emptied out. You could feel it in your chest before you could make sense of what you were seeing. We pulled into the gravel lot at Pruitt's in a column and parked. Ray came out of the bay. He stood at the edge of the lot and looked at the line of bikes and the line of men and he didn't say a word for a long time. Then Nora came out of the house. She was 9 by then. She was wearing a yellow jacket and her dark braids were tied back, and she walked out to the edge of the porch and looked at all of us with those serious eyes that Dex had described. Not afraid. Careful. The way a child looks at something large when she's trying to decide what it means. I walked up to the porch. I crouched down so I was at her level. I told her my name. I told her I'd been a friend of a man named Dex, and that Dex had told me about her sandwiches, and that I wanted her to know that Dex never forgot what she did for him. She looked at me very seriously. She said she remembered him. She said he had nice eyes for someone so big. I said that was about right. Then she looked past me at the line of riders and she asked, very quietly, if we were staying. I said we were staying as long as we were needed. She nodded like that was a sensible answer. Then she went inside and came back out 10 minutes later with a pitcher of sweet tea and a stack of plastic cups, because apparently that was her response to 78 guests, and I will carry that image to my grave. We didn't need to do much with Cutter. That's the thing about the presence of 78 men with Iron Covenant patches, the conversation tends to be brief. Vic and 2 others went and had a talk with him that same afternoon. I don't know exactly what was said. I know it was said quietly. I know that by evening Cutter's truck was gone, and it didn't come back. What a man does when he realizes the whole weight of a brotherhood has turned its attention toward a little girl is usually to find somewhere else to be. We stayed through Sunday. Brothers helped Ray rehang the garage bay door that had been sticking. 2 men with fabrication experience replaced a section of fence that had rotted through on the back perimeter of the property. Someone made a grocery run nobody asked them to make. There was a bonfire in the lot Saturday night, and Ray sat with us, and at some point he started talking about Dex, remembering the afternoon he'd spent in that bay, the way Dex had talked about the Brotherhood, the way he'd made it sound like a life worth building. Ray said he'd thought about that afternoon a lot over the years. He said he'd wondered sometimes if Dex had made it somewhere good. I told him Dex had made it somewhere true. That sometimes that's better than good. Ray nodded. He looked into the fire for a while. When we rode out Monday morning, Ray shook every man's hand. He didn't try to pay us or thank us more than once. He understood, I think, that this wasn't a transaction. This was a debt being honored. This was one road captain's last letter being answered the only way the Iron Covenant knows how, in full, in force, and without condition. I made sure he had the clubhouse number before we left. I told him to use it. He called twice in the next year, both times about nothing urgent, a question about a carburetor rebuild, once, and another time just to say Nora had started riding the bike again and the streamers were holding. I think he called because he wanted us to know he was all right. I think he called because some people, once they know they're not alone, need to confirm it from time to time. I'm glad he did. The letter is still in my desk. I don't keep it because I need reminding of what we owe the dead. I keep it because of what it says about the living. About a little girl who carried a plate to a stranger because that was the rule. About a man who fixed a manifold gasket and refused a dime because guests don't pay. About a road captain who, with whatever time he knew might be running short, spent 3 pages making sure a debt got paid to people who would never know to ask. The Iron Covenant is not a charity. We are not saints. We are men who move through the world under a code that most people can't read from the outside, and we don't expect them to. But if you ride with us long enough, you'll learn one thing above everything else. We remember. We remember the girl who fed Dex a sandwich when she didn't have to. We remember the men who said labor was free because guests don't pay. We remember every small, quiet act of grace that was done for one of ours without expectation of return, and we hold it, and we carry it forward. Dex Hartley is gone. But that letter arrived, and we rode. That's what the patch means.